when Harper, a reserved and compassionate man, unexpectedly takes in two mysterious children, Evan and Lily, his life takes a dramatic turn. These children are more than just guests. They hold a powerful connection to Harper's past, one tied to his estranged brother, Lucas, and a family legacy steeped in secrets and unspoken loyalty. As Harper battles to protect Evan and Lily, Lucas arrives, armed with threats and a plan to seize control, determined to shatter everything Harper holds dear. But Harper isn't alone. With the unwavering support of his loyal staff and the resilience of the children, he makes a choice to stand against Lucas's tyranny. In a mansion filled with memories, betrayal, and unyielding love, Harper's fight becomes a powerful reminder of what family truly means. Will he succeed, or will Lucas's relentless ambition tear them apart? If you're drawn to tales of loyalty, courage, and the triumph of family over power, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing what you're most excited to see in this story. Now, let's step into the shadows and mysteries of the Harper Mansion, where courage and family are put to the ultimate test. Snow drifted across the empty streets, each flake glistening as it passed through the dim streetlights. Evan trudged forward, his worn-out sneakers slipping on patches of ice, but he held his sister close, feeling the weight of her small body nestled into his chest. Lily was bundled in the only blanket they had, a thin, faded thing with frayed edges that did little to shield her from the biting cold. Evan could feel her shivering even through his jacket. He wanted to stop, to find somewhere, anywhere that would block the wind, but every storefront was dark, every door locked. So, he kept going, pushing forward with only one goal in mind: keeping Lily safe. "It's not so cold, right, Lily?" he said, glancing down at her. His voice was gentle, steady, as if he could warm her with words alone. Lily's small face peeked out from the blanket. Her cheeks were flushed, her breath shallow and fast. But she managed to smile, the kind of brave smile that almost broke Evan's heart. "No, it's not cold," she whispered back even as she shivered. "Are we almost there?" Evan nodded, tightening his grip on her. "Almost there. Just keep thinking about it, the big house with the warm fireplace. And the food. I bet there's a whole feast waiting for us. Pies and hot chocolate." His voice took on a soft, dreamy tone, painting a picture so vivid that he could almost believe it himself. The quiet sound of footsteps crunched in the snow behind them, and Evan turned, shielding Lily instinctively. But as the figure approached, he relaxed just a little. "Evan, is that you?" The old man's voice was rough, but there was a kindness in it that Evan had come to recognize over the past few months. "Yeah, it's me, Walter," Evan replied, his breath fogging the air. Walter had once offered them a piece of bread when he found them huddled near the entrance of the old library. Since then, their paths had crossed now and then, with Walter slipping them leftovers from his own dinner or old blankets he no longer used. Walter looked down at Lily, taking in her flushed cheeks and fever-bright eyes. He frowned, his gaze shifting back to Evan. "She's not well," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Evan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yeah, it's been hard." Walter sighed, rubbing his hands together as if bracing himself against the cold or some invisible force. "I know a place where you might be able to get help." He hesitated, glancing around as though afraid someone might overhear. "Richard Harper's place. He's a tough man, but he has a good heart deep down. Lives up on the hill, that big old mansion. If you're lucky, he might be willing to help." Evan listened, barely daring to believe. A mansion on the hill, a place with warmth, food, and safety. But he could see the seriousness in Walter's gaze and felt a spark of hope flicker inside him. "Thank you, Walter," he whispered, clutching Lily tighter as if the warmth of that hope could carry them all the way up the hill. The mansion loomed above them, its high iron gates casting long shadows across the snow-covered path. Evan took a deep breath, feeling Lily's small hand clutching his jacket as he raised his fist and knocked. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence pressed down, heavy and unforgiving, and Evan's heart began to sink. Maybe this was just another empty hope, a place that wouldn't open its doors to them, a warmth they'd never reach. But then the door creaked open, and a tall figure stepped into the light. The man's gaze was sharp, his face weathered by years and responsibility. Paul looked down at the two children, taking in their hollow cheeks and threadbare clothes, the protective way Evan held Lily. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone brusque but not unkind. "Please," Evan whispered, feeling a knot form in his throat. "We just need somewhere warm. Just for tonight." Paul's gaze softened, just a little. He nodded, stepping aside. "Come in." The warmth of the mansion hit them like a wave. Evan felt it instantly, a golden heat that wrapped around him, pushing back the cold that had settled deep in his bones. He glanced down at Lily, who blinked up in awe at the glittering chandeliers, the polished wood floors, the soft rugs that muffled every step. Her fingers relaxed, no longer clutching his sleeve with such desperation. Paul, the butler, led them to a sitting room near the entrance. A fire roared in the fireplace, casting flickering light on the walls adorned with heavy paintings and ornate frames. Evan could see Lily's eyes darting to the armchairs, the couches, each a soft, inviting haven that seemed almost too good to be real. "Sit," Paul instructed, his voice calm, but with an edge of urgency. "I'll fetch Mr. Harper." Evan hesitated, still clutching Lily's hand as he led her to the edge of a couch. They sank into the plush cushions, the fabric soft against their thin clothes. Evan could feel his guard slowly easing, though he kept a protective arm around Lily. "Do you think we can stay?" Lily whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. Evan forced a smile, though he didn't know the answer himself. "We'll see, Lil. Let's just be quiet and hope." "Okay." Before she could reply, footsteps echoed down the hall. A tall man, Richard Harper, entered, his face shrouded in shadow for a moment before he stepped into the light. He wore a dark suit, his posture straight, almost imposing, with a sharp gaze that seemed to take in everything in a single glance. "Who are you?" Harper's voice was measured, his tone both curious and cautious. Evan swallowed hard, instinctively pulling Lily a little closer. I'm Evan," he stammered, trying to keep his voice steady. "And this is my sister, Lily. We just needed somewhere warm for the night." Harper's gaze shifted from Evan to Lily, and for a brief moment, something softened in his expression, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps something deeper. "How did you end up here?" he asked, his voice quieter this time. "We had nowhere else to go," Evan replied, his gaze steady. Someone told us you might be able to help." Harper nodded slowly, as if weighing the truth of Evan's words. He looked down, and his eyes caught on something, a small pendant around Evan's neck. Harper's face went pale, his eyes widening, but he quickly composed himself. "Very well," he said, stepping back. "You may stay tonight. We'll see about tomorrow." The guest room was like something out of a dream, large, with high ceilings and soft yellow lighting that bathed everything in a gentle glow. Paul had brought in a tray with soup and fresh bread, the smell of it filling the air and making Evan's stomach twist with hunger. They ate in silence, each spoonful warming them from the inside out. Lily finished first, looking up at him with a sleepy smile. Her cheeks, flushed from the warmth and food, were no longer pale. Evan felt his heart swell as he watched her, marveling at the peace that had settled over her face. "It's like a castle," she murmured, her voice dreamy. "Do you think we'll get to stay here forever?" Evan chuckled softly, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "Maybe, Lil. Maybe." But as the lights dimmed and Lily drifted into sleep, Evan's mind raced with thoughts of Harper's piercing gaze and the way he'd looked at the pendant. There was something there, something Evan couldn't quite grasp, but it lingered in the back of his mind as he lay awake, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. Meanwhile, down the hall, Harper sat in his study, a single candle casting his face in sharp relief. He held a worn photograph in his hand, a picture of a young woman with gentle eyes and a radiant smile. "Eliza," he whispered, tracing a finger over her face. "Could it be?" Harper stood by the window, gazing out at the snowy landscape. He hadn't thought about Eliza in years, not since the day she vanished without a trace. And yet, every detail of that day was etched into his memory as clearly as if it had just happened. The sound of soft footsteps interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Rachel, her face lined with age, but her eyes sharp as ever, standing in the doorway. She had been with the family for decades, her loyalty unwavering. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Harper?" she asked, her voice gentle. Harper nodded, gesturing for her to sit. He waited until she was settled before speaking. "Rachel, do you remember?" "Eliza." Rachel's face softened, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Of course I remember, sir. She was a bright soul, that one. Always had a kindness about her, like nothing I'd ever seen." Harper nodded, his throat tight as memories flooded back. "I think these children, the boy and the girl who arrived tonight, I think they might be hers." Rachel's eyes widened in surprise. "Eliza's children? But how could that be? She left years ago, and we never heard from her again." "I know," Harper replied, his voice thick with regret. "But the boy wears a pendant one just like Eliza used to wear. And the girl, she has Eliza's eyes. It's unsettling." Rachel leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps it's a sign, sir. Perhaps they're here for a reason." Harper fell silent, turning his gaze back to the window. A chill passed through him, one he couldn't shake. It felt like the ghosts of the past were creeping back, whispering secrets that had long been buried. It was nearly dusk when Harper heard the rumbling sound of a car pulling up the long drive to the mansion. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected visitors, and he certainly hadn't been prepared for this one. Lucas stepped out of the car, his tall frame casting a long shadow on the snow-dusted path as he strode toward the front door. Harper's stomach tightened at the sight of him. There was a darkness to Lucas, a rigid determination in his stride, and a calculating gleam in his eyes that had always unsettled him. Lucas hadn't called ahead, hadn't warned of his arrival, an intentional move. Harper knew, one that kept everyone else on edge. He braced himself, stepping forward to greet his brother as Paul opened the door, his gaze cool and unyielding. "Richard," Lucas greeted, his voice smooth, a hint of mock warmth laced into his tone. "I thought I'd drop by, given all the changes I've been hearing about." Harper stiffened, glancing back toward the hall where he knew Evan and Lily were resting. "This isn't a good time, Lucas." "Oh, I'm sure it isn't." Lucas's gaze flickered, taking in the mansion's interior, noting every detail with a critical eye. He nodded toward Paul and Rachel, who hovered nearby. "You two are looking diligent as ever," he added, the slight sneer unmistakable. Paul's face remained impassive, though Harper caught a flicker of tension in his butler's gaze. "We're simply doing our jobs, sir." Lucas gave a cold smile. "Good to know. It's a family support staff that can be so indispensable in times like these." Harper clenched his fists, determined to keep his composure. "Is there something you wanted, Lucas?" "I've been hearing some interesting things," Lucas replied, stepping closer. "Rumors of visitors. Strangers. I thought perhaps you'd finally come to your senses about expanding the family estate, or at least being cautious about who you let inside." "Lucas," Harper said, his voice low and steady, "those children are none of your concern." Lucas raised an eyebrow, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Children, you say? Strange how quickly you feel attached to them." He took a step forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Careful, Richard. You've seen what happens when secrets start surfacing." Harper felt a chill pass over him. Lucas's words held a weight, a reminder of past conflicts. But before Harper could respond, Lucas leaned back with a casual smirk, as though he'd said nothing at all. "Well, I'd hate to intrude," Lucas said with a mocking smile. "Just thought I'd check on you, little brother." As Lucas walked away, Harper felt the dread settle over him like a weight. He knew this wasn't the last he'd see of Lucas and that his brother's visit had just been the beginning. Evan had grown accustomed to moving quietly, his steps light as he crept through the halls of the mansion, his ears attuned to every sound. He knew Lily was safe, tucked in a bed and fast asleep, but something gnawed at him, an instinct, a tug of worry that made it impossible to rest. Voices echoed from down the hall, drawing him toward the library. He inched closer, his heart pounding as he recognized the voices of Mr. Harper and Paul, their words hushed but urgent. "Lucas won't stop, Paul," Harper was saying. His voice was strained, carrying a weight of worry that Evan had rarely heard. "If he suspects anything, Are you certain, sir? About the children? Paul's voice held a note of hesitancy, as though the question itself was dangerous. I don't know, Harper replied, his voice lower, almost a whisper. But that pendant, it was Eliza's. I'd recognize it anywhere. And the girl, she has Eliza's eyes. Evan's breath caught in his throat, his mind racing as he took in their words. He knew the pendant was his mother's, but he had never known its significance, never questioned the way it had been passed down, a simple family heirloom he had taken for granted. A sense of unease settled over him. His mother's past, the history he never understood, it was all tied to this place, to Harper, and even, it seemed, to the stranger who had visited earlier. A hand suddenly fell on his shoulder, and Evan whirled around, his heart leaping into his throat. Evan, Rachel whispered, her expression gentle yet firm. It's late. You should be resting. Evan swallowed, glancing back toward the library before nodding. Yeah, I wanted to make sure everything was okay. Rachel's gaze softened. Come with me, she murmured, leading him away from the library's door. It's a big house, but there are places even we avoid, secrets better left hidden until the time is right. In the dim light of the early morning, Rachel held out a small bundle of yellowed letters, tied with a faded ribbon. Harper took them carefully, his hands steady, but his eyes filled with a mix of dread and resolve. These were the last words she left behind, Rachel said softly, her gaze downcast. She was frightened, Mr. Harper. She knew someone was watching her. She thought it was Lucas. Harper swallowed, a tightness in his chest as he carefully untied the ribbon. He read the first letter slowly, each word sinking like a stone into his heart. Dear Richard, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, please believe that everything I did for him. I don't know who I can trust anymore. Lucas, he has eyes everywhere. I'm leaving the city for a while, somewhere he can't find us. I can't let him know, he'd never allow it. Take care of him, if anything should happen to me. Protect him like you would have protected me. Harper's hands trembled slightly as he turned to the next letter, each page revealing more of his sister's fear, her anguish, her hope that she might one day return. But the final letter stopped him cold. If you're reading this, I'm gone. Please protect my son, Richard. He's my life. I'm counting on you. Harper's gaze drifted toward the window, the winter light casting his face in shadow. He felt the weight of those words, the plea that his sister had left behind. Protect her child, her son. Evan. It was as if fate had brought the boy to him, to fulfill the promise he hadn't even known he'd made. He looked up, meeting Rachel's gaze, his voice barely a whisper. If these children are hers, then I won't fail her. I'll protect them, no matter the cost. The morning sun poured through the tall windows, casting a soft, golden light across the mansion's grand hall. Harper stood by the window, his gaze lost in thought as he clutched the letters, each word a reminder of Eliza's trust in him. In her quiet way, she had left behind everything he needed to understand her life and the child she had protected until her last day. He heard the faint sound of footsteps and turned to see Paul approaching, his face shadowed with concern. You've been up all night, sir, Paul said, his voice low. And if I may say so, it appears as though you've found something that's weighing heavily on you. Harper exhaled, nodding slowly. It's the boy, Paul. I'm almost certain he's Eliza's son. Paul's expression didn't change, but Harper could see the spark of determination in his eyes. Then you know what you must do, Mr. Harper. If there's a connection to Miss Eliza, you'll need to protect him, and I'll be here to help in any way I can. Harper nodded, his hand resting on Paul's shoulder. The silent loyalty in Paul's eyes was a balm against the storm of doubt in his mind. Thank you, Paul, he murmured, but we may face resistance. Lucas won't let go easily, not when he sees this as a threat. Paul's lips pressed into a firm line. Then we'll face him together. The boy and his sister deserve a chance at safety, sir. Miss Eliza would have wanted that. Harper's gaze drifted down the hall, where Evan and Lily were playing. He took a steadying breath, feeling a surge of resolve. Then we have to be ready, whatever it takes. Evan stood in Harper's study, his fingers tracing the edge of a worn photograph frame. The woman in the picture smiled back at him, a warm, open smile that seemed out of place in the stately, imposing room. She looked kind, her eyes twinkling with a softness that felt familiar. There was something about her face, the way her mouth curved, that tugged at a buried memory in Evan's mind. Her name was Eliza, came a soft voice from the doorway. He turned to see Rachel, standing with a slight smile. She approached him slowly, her gaze gentle as it settled on the photograph. Mr. Harper's sister. She was a bright spirit in this house. Always had a way of making everyone feel seen. Evan looked back at the photograph, his mind racing with questions. Was she like family to him? Rachel nodded, a hint of sadness crossing her face. They were close as family could be, given the expectations in this household. She glanced down at Evan, her expression softening. And if she were here now, I believe she'd want you to know that you're not alone. Evan's eyes dropped, his fingers grazing the edge of the photo frame. But she's gone? Rachel nodded slowly, her hand resting on his shoulder. Yes, but the love she had for you and your sister? That stays. And Mr. Harper, he feels a duty to keep you safe because of her. You're part of something that matters here. Evan took a deep breath, the weight of Rachel's words settling over him. For the first time in a long while, he felt the walls around his heart start to crack just a little. The sun had barely set when Harper heard the heavy footsteps in the hall. He looked up from his papers just as Lucas strode in, his face a mask of carefully controlled anger. "We need to talk," Lucas said, his voice clipped. Harper set his pen down, meeting his brother's gaze with calm resolve. "I assumed as much. What is it you're here to say?" Lucas's smile was cold. "I don't think it's a question of what I want to say, Richard. It's more about what I want done. Those children, you know as well as I do that they have no place here." Harper's jaw tightened. "They have every right to be here, Lucas." "Oh, is that so?" Lucas raised an eyebrow, feigning interest. "And why exactly? Because of some sentimental notion? Don't tell me you're blinded by that old pendant." Harper stood, his gaze unwavering. "I don't expect you to understand, but Eliza was our family, Lucas, and those children deserve protection." Lucas's smile vanished, replaced by a hard, steely look. "You're letting nostalgia cloud your judgment, Richard. I built this estate, kept it running when you couldn't, and I won't let some misguided attachment destroy everything we've worked for." Harper stepped closer, his voice calm but laced with quiet strength. "If protecting them means opposing you, then that's what I'll do." Lucas's expression darkened, his tone lowering to a near growl. "Be careful, Richard. You may find that loyalty has a price." Harper didn't flinch. "I'm willing to pay it." Lucas studied him for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating. Finally, he turned on his heel, his footsteps echoing down the hall. As the door clicked shut, Harper exhaled, his shoulders tense. He knew Lucas wouldn't let the matter rest, not now, and he would need every ally he could find if he hoped to keep his promise to Eliza. The storage room was dimly lit, the dust-filled air thick with the scent of old leather and paper. Evan carefully opened a worn, wooden chest, its hinges creaking softly as he peered inside. Stacks of old letters and photographs lay within, each one a piece of a life he could only imagine. As he shuffled through the papers, his fingers grazed something smooth and familiar, a pendant, nearly identical to the one he wore around his neck. He held it up to the light, his breath catching as he noticed the faint engraving. A single lily, delicate and carefully etched, just like his mother's. But beneath it, wedged between the pages of an old book, was a folded letter. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable, flowing and graceful, much like the memories of his mother's handwriting. "Dear Richard, if you're reading this, it means I may be gone. But please, don't grieve for me. I made my choice for him. If Lucas learns of my son, I fear he'll stop at nothing to keep him from knowing the truth. There are things I can't reveal, secrets I've buried, but I trust that one day you'll understand." Evan read the words slowly, his heart pounding as they echoed in his mind. Lucas's name stood out, each letter sharp and menacing, like a shadow that lingered even in daylight. The thought of someone, a stranger he'd never known, threatening his mother filled him with a strange, quiet anger. A soft sound behind him made him look up. Rachel stood in the doorway, her expression soft but filled with a quiet sadness. "I thought I'd find you here," she said gently. "You've been asking questions, searching." Evan nodded, tucking the letter into his pocket. I wanted to know more about her." Rachel's gaze softened as she came closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your mother was extraordinary, Evan. She was full of life and kindness. But she was also afraid. Lucas's hold on this family has always been strong, and your mother felt she had no choice but to protect you." Evan's brow furrowed. "Why? Why would he care about me?" Rachel hesitated, then sighed. "Sometimes people like Lucas, people who only care about power, see family as something to control. And your mother knew that. She wanted to protect you from that world." Evan swallowed hard, his fingers closing around the pendant in his pocket. "Then I'll make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else. Especially not Mr. Harper." Rachel's eyes shone with quiet pride as she watched him. "Your mother would be proud, Evan. But remember, sometimes the greatest strength is in knowing when to seek help." Harper sat at his desk, his gaze fixed on the letter in his hands. The handwriting was unmistakable. Lucas's precise, sharp penmanship filled each line with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Richard, you've always been sentimental, letting emotions cloud your judgment. But I urge you to reconsider your recent choices. Our family has maintained its standing by understanding that loyalty is not always a matter of blood, but of allegiance. And your allegiance, I fear, has been compromised. Send them away, Richard, before you lose more than you're willing to protect." The letter's final sentence hung in the air, as heavy as a threat spoken aloud. Harper felt a tightness in his chest, but it wasn't fear, it was anger. The kind of anger that simmered quietly, that fueled a deeper resolve rather than clouding his mind. He set the letter aside, glancing at the stack of Eliza's letters on his desk. They were a reminder of his promise, a reminder that he could not betray the memory of his sister. Paul entered the room, his gaze falling on the letter before looking up at Harper. "It's from him, isn't it?" Harper nodded, his jaw clenched. "He wants him gone. Thinks he can force me into doing it." Paul's face was unreadable, but there was a glint in his eye, a quiet defiance that matched Harper's own. "If you stand by them, sir, then so will I." Harper felt a wave of gratitude, a reassurance that he wasn't alone in this fight. He took a steadying breath, nodding. "Then we'll prepare. Whatever Lucas has planned, we'll be ready." The small cafe was tucked away in a quiet part of town, its cozy atmosphere a world away from the cold hostility of the Harper mansion. Harper looked up as Grace entered, her face illuminated by the warm light from the cafe's window. She gave him a small, knowing smile as she took the seat across from him. "Richard Harper," she greeted, her tone wry. "It's been a long time." Harper returned her smile, feeling a pang of nostalgia. "Too long. But I have a feeling this isn't exactly a reunion you'd have hoped for." Grace chuckled softly. "You're right about that. So, tell me, what's this all about?" Harper leaned forward, his voice low. "It's Lucas. He's trying to force me to turn 2 children away. Children I believe are, well, they're family. Eliza's children." Grace's eyes widened slightly, her expression turning serious. "Eliza's children? My God, Richard, why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because until recently, I wasn't sure," Harper admitted, glancing around as though to check for any prying ears. "But I need your help, Grace. If Lucas decides to make a public move, if he tries to discredit me, I need someone to expose what he's done to keep his control over the family." Grace nodded, her expression fierce. "If what you're telling me is true, then he deserves to be exposed. And I'll make sure that happens." A wave of relief washed over Harper. "Thank you, Grace. I knew I could count on you." Grace reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Just promise me, Richard, you won't let Lucas win. Eliza was my friend, too. And if her children are at risk, then you can bet I won't stand by and do nothing." Harper nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "I promise, Grace. Whatever it takes, I won't let him control them." The atmosphere in the mansion had changed. It was subtle at first, a quick glance that lingered too long, hushed conversations that stopped the moment Evan entered the room. The warm, comforting space he'd begun to consider home now felt colder, each corner cast in shadow. He noticed it most when he was with Lily. Some of the staff, once friendly and welcoming, now hurried past them, their eyes averted. Evan didn't understand why, but a strange feeling settled in his gut, a prickling discomfort that made him hold Lily's hand a little tighter. "Evan," she whispered one day, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Why is everyone different?" Evan forced a smile, squeezing her hand. Maybe they're just busy, Lil. Don't worry about it." But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later that evening, as he wandered the hallways, he caught sight of Paul and Rachel talking quietly in the servants' quarters. He paused, hiding just out of sight to listen. "It's Lucas," Rachel murmured, her voice trembling. He's been saying things, Paul, trying to convince everyone that Harper's lost his mind, that the children are nothing but trouble." Paul's face darkened. "He's always known how to spread fear, Rachel. But we won't let him win. Harper's doing the right thing, and we need to stay strong." Evan swallowed hard, stepping back into the shadows. He didn't understand everything they were saying, but he knew one thing for sure: Lucas was behind it. And whatever he was planning, it was tearing the household apart. Harper's study was dimly lit, the soft glow from the fireplace casting long shadows across the walls. Evan sat across from him, hands clasped tightly in his lap, his gaze fixed on the stack of letters on Harper's desk. "Evan," Harper began, his voice quiet yet steady, "there are things I need to tell you. Things about your mother, about why she left, and about why Lucas is doing everything he can to keep you from knowing." Evan looked up, his heart pounding as he met Harper's gaze. "Why does he hate us so much? Why does he want us gone?" Harper sighed, resting his hands on the letters. "Lucas has always believed in control over the family, the estate, everything. When your mother defied him, she became a threat. And now, you and Lily are reminders of that defiance." Evan felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to stay calm. "But we haven't done anything." "It doesn't matter to him," Harper replied. He picked up one of the letters, a faded piece of paper with his sister's familiar handwriting. "Your mother, Eliza, left these behind. She knew one day if something happened to her, I would need to protect you." Harper handed the letter to Evan, who read it slowly, each word a testament to his mother's courage and love. "My dearest Richard, if you're reading this, please know that I did everything for my son's future. If he's still out there, he deserves a life free from fear, free from Lucas's control. Keep him safe, Richard. Keep him safe from this life." Evan's fingers tightened around the paper, his heart heavy with a fierce resolve. "I'll protect Lily," he said quietly. "No matter what." Harper placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Evan. I made a promise to your mother, and I intend to keep it." A warmth spread through Evan, a feeling of safety he hadn't known in years. For the first time, he felt that his mother's spirit was with him, guiding him, giving him strength. And he knew, deep down, that Harper's promise was one he could trust. Harper's footsteps echoed down the empty hall, each step bringing him closer to the inevitable. He knew Lucas would be waiting in his study, and as he approached, he could almost feel the air grow colder, the tension thickening with every step. When he entered, Lucas was seated in Harper's chair, leaning back with an air of ownership, his gaze piercing as he looked up. "Ah, Richard," he drawled, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten our little family chat." Harper stood tall, his expression unwavering. "Say what you came to say, Lucas." Lucas's smirk faded, replaced by a steely, calculating gaze. "Very well, then. I'm giving you a choice. The children or the estate. Choose wisely, Richard, because I assure you, you won't keep both." Harper's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "Those children are my family, Eliza's children, and I won't abandon them." Lucas laughed softly, shaking his head. "Oh, Richard, always the sentimental one. But sentiment doesn't preserve legacies, doesn't protect fortunes. I have the resources, the power. You think you can defy me? I don't need power to protect them," Harper replied, his voice calm, but filled with a quiet, unbreakable resolve. "I need only the will to do what's right." Lucas's gaze darkened, a flash of anger breaking through his calm facade. "Then you leave me no choice." He stood, brushing imaginary dust from his suit. "I've allowed this charade to go on long enough. But I'll have the children gone by week's end, one way or another. Consider this your final warning." Harper held his gaze, unyielding, as Lucas turned and strode from the room, his footsteps fading down the hall. When the silence settled, Harper took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. Whatever came next, he would be ready. The servants' hall was filled with a hushed tension as Harper stood at the front of the room, his face lit by the dim glow of a single overhead light. Paul and Rachel sat closest to him, their expressions resolute, while the other staff watched with expressions of growing resolve and determination. Grace stood by the door, notebook in hand, observing with a quiet intensity. "Thank you all for coming," Harper began, his voice low but steady. "I've called you here because I need your help. Lucas has issued an ultimatum. Either I send the children away, or he'll take drastic measures to secure control of this estate, and I fear what he might do." The room shifted with murmurs of unease, but no one spoke until Paul, ever steadfast, raised his hand slightly, nodding at Harper. "We understand, sir, and we stand with you. We've all seen what Lucas is capable of, and none of us want that influence to extend any further." Rachel leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Those children deserve a chance. They've been through enough, and Miss Eliza wouldn't want her family torn apart by Lucas's schemes." Grace cleared her throat, stepping forward to address the staff. "I'm here to ensure that whatever happens, Lucas's actions will be made known to the public. My investigation will reveal the kind of power he wields and the damage he's done to others. But I'll need your cooperation to gather any information you may have." A murmur of agreement swept through the room, and Harper felt a surge of relief. They weren't just employees, they were allies, friends, willing to stand by him through this ordeal. "Then it's settled," Harper said, his voice thick with gratitude. "We will protect Evan and Lily. Whatever Lucas brings, we'll face it together." The sound of tires crunching on the gravel drive sent a ripple of anxiety through the mansion. From the window, Evan watched as several black cars came to a stop, their polished surfaces gleaming under the overcast sky. He could see Lucas step out, his figure tall and imposing, flanked by several stern-looking men in dark suits. Evan felt a chill creep up his spine, and he instinctively took a step back, his mind racing. He'd heard enough to know that Lucas was dangerous, that his arrival meant something bad. He glanced over his shoulder, relieved to see Harper standing just behind him, a calm and steady presence. "Stay close, Evan," Harper murmured, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Don't wander off, and keep Lily with you." Evan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Do you think he'll try to take us?" Harper's gaze softened, a mixture of sadness and fierce resolve. "Not if I can help it. I won't let him harm you or Lily. But we must be careful." As Lucas entered the mansion, his gaze swept the hall, taking in every corner as though it were his own. He offered a tight, humorless smile when his eyes landed on Harper, who stood resolute, his expression unreadable. "Richard," Lucas greeted, his voice smooth as silk. "I thought I'd pay a visit. I trust you received my message." Harper held his ground, his voice calm and steady. "You've made your intentions clear, Lucas. But this is my home, and you won't take it or them from me." Lucas's smile widened, his gaze flickering to the staff, who watched warily from a distance. "We'll see, little brother. We'll see." For the rest of the day, the mansion felt like a coiled spring, tension simmering beneath the surface. Lucas's associates roamed the halls, their presence a silent reminder of the control he sought to impose. But Harper's staff remained vigilant, each of them a watchful sentinel, prepared for whatever might come. The soft murmur of voices drifted from the study as Evan crouched behind the door, listening carefully. He could hear Harper, Paul, and Rachel speaking in low, urgent tones, their voices laced with tension. "We can't wait any longer," Harper was saying. "Lucas's associates are everywhere, and we don't know what they'll do next. I have to get Evan and Lily out of here, somewhere safe." Rachel's voice was filled with quiet concern. "But where will they go, sir?" "Lucas will have eyes everywhere. I'll make arrangements, Harper replied, his voice resolute. Paul will take them to the estate in the countryside. It's secluded, and Lucas won't think to look there. Evan's heart pounded as he listened, his mind racing. Harper wanted to send them away to hide them. But even as he thought about the safety this plan would offer Lily, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that leaving men abandoning Harper to face Lucas alone. He waited until the conversation had ended and the others had dispersed before slipping back to his room, his thoughts a whirlwind. Lily was his responsibility. He'd protected her all these years. But this felt different. Leaving meant giving up, leaving Harper to fight alone. A quiet resolve settled over him. He wouldn't run. Not when Harper had done so much to protect him and Lily. They were family now, and family didn't abandon each other. That night, as Harper came to his room to discuss the plan, Evan looked him in the eye, his expression firm. I'm not leaving you, Mr. Harper. If you're staying to fight, then so am I. Harper's gaze softened, a look of pride and sorrow in his eyes. Evan, you don't have to do this. Lucas is dangerous. I know, Evan replied, his voice steady. But my mother wouldn't have run. She stayed to protect me. And I'm going to do the same for you. For a long moment, Harper didn't speak, the silence between them filled with unspoken words. Finally, he placed a hand on Evan's shoulder, nodding. Then we face this together. The library was dim, the heavy velvet curtains drawn, casting a shadow over the tall shelves lined with leather-bound books. Harper stood in the middle of the room, his posture firm, though he could feel the cold weight of Lucas's gaze boring into him from across the table. Lucas folded his arms, his face impassive, though his eyes gleamed with a calculating intensity. Richard, I'm here for one reason and one reason only. This is your final chance. Send those children away or watch everything you've worked for crumble. Harper's jaw clenched, but he remained composed, his voice steady. You can threaten me all you want, Lucas, but it won't change anything. Evan and Lily are staying, and nothing you say will convince me otherwise. Lucas's expression darkened, a cold smile twisting his lips. You always were the naive one, weren't you, little brother? You think this is about kindness, about family? No, it's about power, control, and I will not let two children ruin that. Harper's gaze didn't waver. They're family, Lucas. Eliza's children. And I promised her I'd protect them. Lucas leaned forward, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Your loyalty to her was your first mistake, Richard, and it will be your last. With that, he turned on his heel, leaving the library as his words hung heavy in the air. Harper stood alone, his heart pounding, a fierce determination settling over him. He knew now that Lucas would stop at nothing, and he would have to be ready. The grand hall was silent as Harper addressed the staff, his voice calm but tinged with urgency. Evan and Lily stood by his side, and although the younger girl's eyes were wide with fear, Evan kept his hand firmly around hers, offering a steadying presence. Lucas won't stop until he gets what he wants, Harper began, his gaze moving from face to face. He's made it clear that he'll go to any length to gain control of this estate. But I want each of you to know this. We're in this together, and I won't allow him to tear this family apart. Paul nodded, his expression resolute. We've all seen what Lucas is capable of, sir, and none of us are willing to let him take this place without a fight. Harper felt a surge of gratitude, and he took a deep breath before addressing Evan. Evan, you don't have to stay if you're scared. There's a way to get you and Lily out safely. But Evan's gaze was unwavering, his voice steady. I'm not leaving you, Mr. Harper. You kept your promise to my mom, and I'm keeping mine to you. We'll stand together. Harper placed a hand on his shoulder, pride and affection filling his eyes. Thank you, Evan. Whatever happens next, remember we face it together. The air inside the mansion was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the quiet murmur of voices and the occasional creak of footsteps. Evan stood by the grand staircase, watching as Harper and Paul exchanged tense glances, their faces set in quiet determination. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the entryway. Evan felt a chill run down his spine as Lucas's associates filed into the foyer, their expressions hard and unyielding. One of them, a tall man with a stern, calculating look, stepped forward. "Mr. Harper," he said, his tone cold and formal, "we're here on behalf of Mr. Lucas Harper. We ask that you hand over the children and vacate the premises." Harper stood at the top of the staircase, his gaze unflinching. "You're trespassing," he replied, his voice steady. "These children are under my protection, and I won't let you take them." The man's expression hardened, and he took a step forward, his gaze shifting to Evan and Lily. "This doesn't have to be difficult, Mr. Harper. Lucas gave you a choice. Now it's time to comply." Harper raised his hand, his voice firm. "I don't care what Lucas has ordered. You won't lay a hand on these children." Behind him, Paul, Rachel, and the other household staff formed a line, their expressions resolute. Grace, the journalist, stood near the door, her phone recording every moment, a silent witness to the unfolding confrontation. Evan felt a swell of courage as he watched them stand together, a fierce pride in his heart. He stepped forward, his voice stronger than he'd expected. "We're not going anywhere. This is our home now." The tall man's expression flickered with frustration, but he held his ground, exchanging a glance with his colleagues. "Very well," he said, his tone cold. "But I assure you, Mr. Harper, Lucas won't take this lightly." Harper's gaze was unwavering. "Neither will we." As the men withdrew, the household staff closed ranks around Evan and Lily, a powerful reminder that they weren't alone. Harper looked at Evan, his face filled with a mixture of pride and determination. "Thank you, Evan," he said quietly, "for standing by me." Evan nodded, a sense of calm washing over him. "We're family now. We don't back down." The air in the mansion felt different now, a steady, unbreakable calm settling over the halls as Harper and his allies moved with quiet purpose. Evan could feel it too, a shared resolve that seemed to radiate from every corner of the house. It was as if each room, each wall, each memory contained within the old stone held its breath, waiting. Harper called the staff to the dining hall, where the long table had been transformed into an informal meeting space. Rachel stood by his side, her usual gentle smile replaced with a look of quiet fierceness. Paul was there, too, his expression hard as he nodded in silent agreement with each word Harper spoke. "We're not just standing up for the children," Harper began, his voice low but carrying through the room. "We're standing for everything this family represents. Lucas's threats may be real, but so is our loyalty to each other and to this place." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and Paul raised his hand, his gaze unwavering. "Sir, we've all seen Lucas's kind of power cold calculating, but we've chosen to stay here, not out of obligation, but because of what you've done for us. Whatever comes next, we're with you." Evan felt a surge of pride as he looked around the room, seeing the strength and loyalty in each face. The fear that had hung over him since Lucas's arrival began to lift, replaced by a quiet courage. After the meeting, Grace pulled Evan aside, her expression serious. "Your story, Evan, it's already making a difference. People are reading about what's happening here, and they're starting to see Lucas for who he really is." Evan nodded, a sense of hope settling in his chest. For the first time, he felt that they weren't fighting alone, that the world beyond the mansion's walls might finally see the truth. The sound of footsteps echoed ominously down the mansion's long corridors, growing louder with each step as Lucas strode through the front door. His expression was colder than ever, a mask of barely concealed fury. Harper and Evan waited in the foyer, standing side by side as Lucas approached. "You've put me in a difficult position, Richard," Lucas sneered, his gaze moving from Harper to Evan, lingering with barely veiled contempt. "I thought you'd understand that family loyalty is worth more than sentimentality, but you've chosen to defy me for them." Harper's gaze didn't waver. "You're mistaken, Lucas. I haven't chosen against family, I've chosen to protect it." Lucas's lip curled, his tone dropping to a deadly whisper. "I have the law on my side, Richard. Do you really think a few kind words and a loyal staff will stop me from taking what's rightfully mine?" Just then, Grace stepped into the foyer, her voice steady. "You don't have the law on your side, Lucas. Not anymore." She held up a copy of her latest article, the headline bold and clear: "Influence or Intimidation? The Hidden Power Struggle at the Harper Estate." Lucas's face twisted with anger as he snatched the newspaper from her hands, his eyes scanning the article. The color drained from his face as he read the details exposés of his manipulative tactics, accounts of the intimidation he'd used against Harper and the staff, and even anonymous testimonies from former allies. "This is slander," he growled, his hand shaking as he crumpled the paper. "No, it's the truth," Grace replied calmly. "And the people are listening, Lucas. The more you push, the more they'll see the kind of man you really are." Lucas's face darkened, and he turned back to Harper, his voice filled with barely suppressed rage. "You think you've won? I assure you, this isn't over." Harper's expression was calm, his voice steady. "Perhaps it's time it was, Lucas. You may control many things, but you don't control us." Lucas glared at him, his jaw clenched, before he stormed out, his footsteps echoing through the mansion. The tension in the air finally began to lift, and Evan felt a wave of relief wash over him. The days following Lucas's confrontation felt different, as if a storm had passed. Evan noticed at first a shift in the way the staff moved through the halls, the quiet smiles exchanged between them, the laughter that once again filled the kitchen. The mansion, once thick with tension, was now a place of warmth and resilience. Evan stood with Lily in the front courtyard, watching as Paul and Rachel helped with repairs, each movement filled with purpose. Lily reached up, tugging on his sleeve. "Are we safe now, Evan?" she asked, her voice small. Evan crouched beside her, a reassuring smile on his face. "Yeah, Lily, I think we finally are." Just then, Harper walked over, his gaze warm as he watched the children. "You two have been through a lot," he said softly, "but I want you to know that this is your home now. You belong here." Evan felt a lump in his throat, but he nodded, a quiet sense of peace settling over him. "Thank you, Mr. Harper, for everything." Harper's hand rested on Evan's shoulder, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "Your mother would be proud of you, Evan. You've shown more courage than most men I know." Evan's heart swelled with pride, and he knew, in that moment, that this was more than a victory over Lucas. It was a triumph of family, of loyalty, of resilience. And it was something Lucas could never take away from them. As we bring this journey to a close, remember the real strength of a family lies not in wealth or power, but in the courage to stand by one another. If this story moved you or made you reflect on the power of loyalty and love, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories of courage, hope, and redemption. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What was your favorite moment, and how did this story resonate with you? And stay tuned, because there's always another tale to tell, filled with lessons on love, family, and the light that shines even in the darkest times. Thank you for watching, and remember, there's always a place where courage and kindness prevail. Until next time.